My name is Letitia Bird. If I have not had the pleasure of meeting you all, pronoun she, her. I'm the CEO of Perfecta. Perfecta is a talent development and leadership consulting agency. We work with ERGs all the time, which is why we love talking about this here, helping companies launch ERGs, training ERG leaders, training executive sponsors, you name it, to working with councils, committees, but we also provide fractional people in HR work as well. So that's a little bit about me. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina. I see there's someone in here that is based in the 919. And I have a cat named Nipsey. He's my cat baby. He's like 20 pounds, but he's still a baby to me. And with that being said, I'll just turn it over to the person on the right of the screen, which is Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Thank you for joining our combo. I'm Nicole. I'm based in the Bay Area. I am a DEI and talent development consultant with Perfecta, where I have the pleasure of working with Letitia and her amazing team and supporting our clients through all of their DEI strategy, ERG work, DEI councils. And prior to joining Perfecta, I was with Google for nearly 14 years, leading DE&I, and I led our Hispanic Latino ERG there. So I'm very passionate about this space. Jesse and I share in our background that we both started in sales, and our volunteer work in ERGs is what actually became our own career accelerator that allowed us to pivot into this important space in DEI. And so I'm just really excited to be here with you all and jump in. And so I'll hand it over to Jesse to introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole, and thank you, Letitia, for the opportunity. Hey, everybody, Jesse Gutierrez here, originally from Orange County, California, but I've been in Chicago almost 10 years now, so the cold did not keep me out. I have a little bit over a decade of diversity, equity, inclusion, and leadership development experience, really touching a lot of different industries. So I've worked in higher ed, manufacturing, tech, and then most recently here at Gensler, the architecture and design industry. So I'm currently our global inclusion program manager, and I oversee our inclusion programs for more than 6,000 team members across the world, and really focused on our strategies to build a just and inclusive future. I'm also the founder of HIM, and through my work at HIM, I cultivate inclusive, I impact people, teams, and workplaces. And my mission is pretty simple. It's simply to educate so that we can celebrate. And then on a personal note, love binging reality TV, checking out new local coffee shops, attending concerts when it's warm and sunny in Chicago. So if any of that resonates, I'd love to connect with you all. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Awesome. First off, blessed to be here with three giants on this particular stage here. Hello, my name is Carlo Moore. I'm a senior community manager here at Red Ventures. If you don't know what Red Ventures is, it's basically a big tech company and a global portfolio of a lot of startup companies in the tech space. And I had the pleasure of helping create ERGs here at Red Ventures. Which is pretty interesting that it's now come full circle with creating ERGs and now managing them 8 years later here at Red Ventures. And so, in this particular role as a senior community manager, I have three different roles. One of them is managing our five employee resource groups, also managing our audio and visual for all of our big events, which we can probably get into a little bit later on. And then also building internal and external community building within and outside of Red Ventures. So that looks like working with Girls on the Run or Make a Wish, or just working with other nonprofits that some of our employees are on the boards for. So blessed to be able to do passionate work here at Red Ventures. And if I'm not working at Red Ventures, I'm working at home as a dad of two. So I have a 13-year-old Oliver and a 3-year-old Cairo, which crazy age gap, I know. So pray for me, but it's been a pleasure and it's fun to do. So thank you all for being here. And thank you, Jesse, Nicole, and Letitia, for allowing me to speak with you all today.
Thank you all so much. Real quick, if I know we've done intros, before we get into the meat of our discussion, I'll tell you all a little bit about Perfecta. At Perfecta, we operate in really three core areas: talent, so talent, anything HR, people ops, um, culture, so DEIB, ERGs, committees, councils, and then leadership. So developing leadership programs, learning and development programs, trainings, the whole nine. We've worked across all industries from tech to healthcare to insurance to finance, nonprofits. Love working with companies that really invest in their people and understand that people are the heart of their success. Um, and we wanted to start hosting these monthly webinars, and I really would just rather call it a chat. Like this feels more like FaceTime with friends, just because we really need community. I think community is more important than it's ever been before, and we want to be able to share what we've learned, bring in some amazing people and brilliant folks in this space as well that can share from their experience. And so we will continue to host these. And so we had one last month that was about RTO and how to make sure companies are still putting their people first during the RTO mandates. This month is about ERGs, and stay tuned for what is happening next month. But right now, ERGs are, being really leaned on from a DEIB perspective. We'll get into some of those stats in a second. And what we really care about here at Perfecta is making sure ERGs have the structure, the systems, they have strong sponsorship, because really ERGs are much more than a club where people get together for happy hours. If ERGs are nurtured in the right way and they're able to reach their most potential, they're able to support retention, right? They're able to support attracting the best people. They're able to build leadership pipelines, right? And so we're going to talk a lot today about what that actually looks like in real action. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Nicole to kind of talk us through what we're going to cover today.
Thank you, Letitia. Yeah, so as Letitia mentioned, we know that with a lot of teams rolling back formal investments in this space, ERGs have become increasingly important to continue to drive this important work forward. And for those of us who have been in this space for a long time, we know that ERGs have always been the backbone of culture work. They are the true culture carriers in their company, the true advocates for their communities. And it's as a result of ERGs that DEI teams actually exist today. And so they're just such a critical component to so many areas. And what we're hearing a lot of as ERGs continue to grow is, how do I actually make sure that my ERG is aligned with the right business strategy and goals? How do I get recognized for, those true outcomes that we are driving forward around employee engagement, retention, talent development, all of those things? How do I communicate the value of not just my ERG, but also myself as an ERG leader? What metrics should I be using? How do I highlight my work to my upper leadership so that it can actually be, as we've talked about, a leadership accelerator, a career development tool for you? And then finally, in the hybrid environments that we've all been operating in, how do I continue to just build community and connection in a meaningful way in my ERG? Is another thing that we know some ERGs have been, grappling with over these years, as all of us navigate like burnout and the crazy world that we're living in. These spaces are increasingly important. So how do we keep evolving to make sure that we build that strong connection? Letitia, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Nicole. All right, so before we get into the conversation, wanted to share these numbers with you all. Take a screenshot of this, take a picture of it with your phone, take it back to your people at your organization, because there is proof in the work that your ERGs are doing, and these numbers are not small. So let's go through each. 57% of companies say their ERGs have directly influenced business innovation. This is not just morale, this is not just office vibes, but this is innovation, right? Companies that have more diversity, that are more equitable, that are more inclusive, bringing more innovation revenue. So what we know to be true is that your leaders, they love hearing innovation and they love data. So bringing those two together, this really shows that ERGs are a part of that. The next one is here, ERG members are rated as high performers 89% more often than non-members. And ERG leaders, 153% more often. And you all, that is not a coincidence. Your ERG leaders are carrying a lot. They are doing a lot. And I just want to emphasize here that your ERG leaders will be a phenomenal leadership pipeline if you invest in their leadership development. And they will also develop other members within their ERGs to become leaders. So we preach a lot about succession planning here at Perfecta with the ERGs we work with, because really ERGs are a phenomenal leadership pipeline. Next is retention. ERG members have a 75% higher promotion rate and leaders 144% higher. So if anyone in your organization is still asking if ERGs are worth the investment, this is your answer. Send it to everybody that needs to see these numbers, okay? And these numbers are from Telescope's Fortune 500 ERG benchmark report, and the link will be sent out in the resources after today. Okay, Nicole, let's get the audience in on this. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. That data is so powerful. Just wow. No reason not to be investing in your ERGs when you look at that data. So before we dive into some of our questions, we would love to hear directly from those of you who are either leading an ERG or overseeing teams, supporting your ERG groups. What do you need most right now? Where are you struggling? What are you really advocating for? And how can we support you by bringing that into our conversation today? Please let us know, drop it in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, just what's top of mind. It's always good, to just see what's going well or challenging across our different companies and industries.
A lot of answers coming through in the chat. So Shay said to be included in the company's overall business strategy. Super for the senior leadership, how it's presented and prioritized is key. There's a couple of ways too, Shay, when I'm thinking about ERGs being included in the company's business strategy. It's like, yes, communicating ERG success, but also using your ERGs as a feedback loop to inform business strategy. That would be a really, really great goal as your ERGs continue to mature. Justina said, we are struggling with guidance from leadership on what shape they want our ERGs to take and the business strategy we need to align with. I feel like our panelists will have some thoughts on that one, because I have a lot, but I want to hear what you all would do in that scenario. I will say, Justina, you're not alone there. So we'll get into that one for sure. Best practices, C-suite support for all ERGs, overall leadership to support the ERG events that happen within the organization, really tapping on your exec sponsors, giving them clear expectations, training, all of that is very important. How to not only communicate impact, but best practices. Okay, lots of really strong answers coming through in the chat. Challenges in the succession piece is a huge one. So many good ones here. Nicole, what are your thoughts on some of the messages coming through in the chat?
I mean, I think there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
A lot of you are grappling with some of the same questions. I think one of the hidden costs to this work is the ownership and accountability within ERG leaders, and how do you really manage that to make sure that you have the right teams in place to drive the work forward. And so I think the succession planning is an important piece to that. And as companies, how do you invest in and develop the skills needed so that your ERG leaders can be those accountable owners, and feel the support that they deserve to be driving this work forward at companies? So thank you all so much for sharing. Please continue to stay engaged with us on the chat. We'll be checking throughout our conversation and try and incorporate a lot of this into what we touch on today.
I love the responses coming through in the chat. I'm so excited about it, but like I can't wait to hear from Carlo and Jesse on some of these. So we'll get into the first question here. And I will start with you, Carlo. ERGs were built to strengthen connection and culture. In this moment of tighter budgets, shoestring budgets, and shifting priorities, what have you seen ERGs do really well, and where are they losing momentum?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing that I have seen ERGs do incredibly well, especially like in the last few years, is truly creating a safe space of belonging that translates into leadership development and community building. And I think one thing here at Red Ventures, we wanted to make sure that everyone knew, including leadership, that ERGs aren't just a social group, but they function as what I like to call leadership incubators, right? So people stepping into leadership roles where they're practicing skills like strategic planning, stakeholder management, event execution, influencing without authority, if you will. Those are the same skills that you look for in any emerging leader, right? And so I think there's three key areas where I think ERGs are really thriving right now. The first one is leadership development, right? So ERG leaders are gaining real leadership experience outside of their day-to-day roles. And when organizations intentionally recognize this as a leadership development, I believe ERGs can then become a true pipeline for future managers and future directors at that particular company, right? The second one is cross-organizational connection. And so that's like ERGs connecting across business units, across levels, across geographies in ways that truly, what I believe, normal org charts can't, right? Especially in this hybrid environment, I think it's very difficult sometimes to have that true connection, but I think ERGs do it so well, and that connection is incredibly valuable. And then the last one is cultural insight. And I think that's pretty just self-explanatory, right? They serve as a pulse check for employee experience. I think the ERGs truly are the best in terms of having a pulse of what the temperature of a company is and what employees are really looking for. And leadership can really utilize them if given the opportunity to say, okay, what are employees looking for? How can we make sure they feel seen, valued, heard within the company? Now, where I think ERGs are losing momentum is when they are viewed as an extra rather than a strategic, right? And so they are, ERGs are doing great work, but they're not being tied to business outcome or business impact. Or ERG leaders are starting to feel burned out because their work isn't recognized or supported by their managers or by senior leaders. Or programming for your employee resource group is becoming an event based instead of impact based. And so what I work with my ERG co-chairs on is when you're thinking through these events, you have to change your language, right? And so it's not what events should we host, it's what outcomes are we trying to drive here? And so whenever we're looking at any particular event, I always tell them, you should always start with what do I want my ERG members to think, feel, and do? Those are the three things you need to think through because when you're thinking and you know what you want them to think coming out of this event, what you want them to do, and you want them to feel, it will help out there. And so when ERGs are aligning their work through these outcomes, they stop being a nice to have and more so being recognized as a true strategic partner when it comes to talent and business performance.
That's great. That's amazing. Yeah, I just wrote down impact over events because you're right, right? Even when we're working with ERGs, we typically always start with, well, what events do we want to host? But if you think about the end goal, the impact, that will make it much more intentional and strategic, right? And then I think the think, feel, do goes into that, the experience that you're creating through the work. Amazing. And panelists, do y'all want to add anything to that before we move to the next question?
The only thing that I would add onto that is where I'm seeing ERG teams losing momentum right now is they're getting stuck in this cycle of overthinking. They're as the culture carriers, they also have a really big responsibility to do the right thing for their communities, to build the right spaces for their communities. But at the same time, companies are increasingly strict about what topics you can talk about and what types of events you can be hosting and things of that nature. And so I'm seeing a lot of leaders just feel stuck in that cycle of overthinking what should we do, what shouldn't we do. Um, and not knowing the best way to engage in their community. And to that, I would just say, like, Don't be afraid, use your gut and your instinct. And it's okay to like build the plane as it's flying, right? Your community just wants consistent ways to engage and connect with one another. So things don't have to be perfect all the time. Like you can co-build what that looks like with your community. So that's just the one thing that I thought of as part of that conversation that I'm hearing a lot right now. Jesse?
Yeah, no, I love all of those nuggets of wisdom. I wanted to kind of double click on something Carlos shared as well, and it was about the ERGs kind of being the pulse and the feedback for leadership, which 100% agree with. And I think as inclusion leads, ERG program managers, members or leaders of these groups, I think that's where it can sometimes be tricky because sometimes the leadership doesn't want to be receptive to what they're hearing. So I think there's like a coaching moment there and acknowledging that, hey, if something isn't a positive piece of feedback, that's okay. How do we turn it into hopefully an opportunity to make it positive? So just wanted to add that too.
You know what, Jesse, this is probably going to go on a side path, but you bring up a good point around supporting or encouraging ERG leaders to share that feedback with their executive sponsor so that they can get the support that they, need. Sometimes I
Hmm.
see that to be a tricky spot for ERG leaders to be in when they know kind of some things that could help to problem solve issues within the culture, but there might be just a hesitancy because it's like, well, this person is a few levels above me,
Hmm.
what if they're not receptive, right? So what would you say to ERG leaders or program managers that might be navigating that?
Yeah, and I'll touch more in depth in one of the questions later, but I would say building that trust with your sponsor is really key. Because if you don't have the trust, you will not feel comfortable to even broach this topic.
Yeah,
Having said that, though, I know it varies by company, right? I think some orgs you're given a sponsor without having any say. And then in other organizations, you are co-creating that partnership thanks to the DEI team, for example. But for me, I would say it's always that level setting of trust. And once you have that trust, it's okay to have those tougher conversations. If that trust is like you're trying to nurture it, it's still not working out for whatever reason, I would say your local, whether it's HR, DEI, those are your key partners and collaborators, and it's okay to loop them in too.
absolutely. Jesse, while I have you, I'm going to
Yeah.
actually ask you the next question here. So, nearly 40% of employees report feeling isolated at work. In a hybrid environment, how can ERGs genuinely help people feel connected and a sense of belonging?
Such an important question. So before I hop in, though, I wanted to share a little bit on how ERGs helped me personally feel less isolated at work. And this was early on in my career. So I was at Schneider Electric. It's a global energy technology leader. And I remember attending the onboarding where this was the first time I ever heard about employee resource groups, which was great. And I wanted to learn more, but I quickly noticed that we were missing a community focus for LGBTQ plus inclusion. And I'm a part of that community. So I was wondering, why is that? So I kind of took this as a sign to proactively jump in, raise my hand, and then kick off the firm's first ever group for this community and allies, of course. And then that really resulted in a bunch of global activations, and it was an organization for 160,000 team members across the world. So I share that example because I think it speaks to recognizing this could be an isolating moment and then kind of taking the next step and thinking through how can I fill that gap, so to say. So that was a little bit of a personal experience on how I could have felt isolated, but I kind of took it the next step and tried to create experiences that were inclusive for new hires within that community. But what I did want to focus on for this question was some data, because I love data. Hopefully, folks on the call love data too. So while I was at Upwork, and Upwork is a hybrid company, remote first initially, right? But because of that, connection can't really be left to chance. So if you're working remote or hybrid, you're oftentimes not in an office full time. So you could feel lonely. It's just part of the process, right? So within our we call it a UBC program, an Upwork Belonging Community Program, which was essentially our equivalent to ERGs. So I took a look at engagement data and noticed something that was pretty insightful. So we found that employees who identified with an ERG and were active in that same ERG had higher levels of engagement than the same community members who were not in the ERG. So, for example, I'll use me as an example. I am Latino and I'm in a Latino ERG. I would have higher engagement than a peer who was also Latino but not in the ERG. So that may seem intuitive or well, like that's not shocking, but it's a nice data point again, connecting to what Letitia was saying to prove the business case and the impact and why executives should sponsor and support and fund these types of groups. And again, it connects back to isolation because if you aren't intentionally creating the spaces in a hybrid environment, you're kind of leaving the connections to chance, right? And when you leave them to chance, you may have low engaged team members. What happens when you have low engagement? Folks leave, there's higher attrition. So we want to combat that. And that was an interesting data point that it was nice to say this was an assumption, but once we could actually prove it, it really bolstered the impact of those groups. So just wanted to leave you with that.
That's really interesting. And, also love that you created an ERG and you saw a gap and you did something with that. And I imagine that ERG is still hopefully operating today. And isn't that cool to know like you made an impact there and it's still running? Um, Carla, I would love your thoughts on that, especially given that your company is hybrid as well. And I know that you all do host a lot of events for, online, virtual, but also in person. So how do your ERGs bring that sense of belonging and community in a hybrid environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Jesse, thank you so much for all the data there. I would say the first thing I always tell our co-chairs to do is figure out, it's talking about the pulse of what employees need, figure out what your ERG members are looking for, right? And so that starts off with a survey. What are you all interested in seeing? What are you all interested in doing? And it kind of goes back to the first question you asked me around tighter budgets. One thing I have noticed is majority of the most impactful events that our ERGs put on are mostly the cheapest ones because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you're not trying to buy the biggest speaker that, or creating a big panel or a big gala. It's really more so of connection, belonging, having a moment where everyone can kind of get to know each other. And so I think the biggest things that we try to do is do that through a hybrid experience. And so we always try to keep hybrid in mind whenever we're developing any type of impact-based event of saying, okay, yes, we know what this is going to look like in person, but what does the remote experience look like? And it starts off with having a subcommittee, having people who are remote on that subcommittee and saying, what is the experience going to look like for you, right? And so whether that is, hey, this event is not going to be in person, it's going to be strictly virtual for everyone, so everyone feels connected, right? Or if it's more so creating an event and while people are waiting on Zoom, you may have something going on in the in person, like something's happening in the room, but you're also having an experience for someone who is on Zoom. So it could be two different experiences happening, and then everyone comes together for the actual event. And so just really making sure that people feel a part of what's taking place and just kind of keeping that in mind. And that's where my team, the corporate communications team, comes in and helps them out, where you have the idea, and what we're going to do is add what we call the sauce to make sure that everything tastes great when it's time for the remote and the in-person experience.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting that the most impactful programs are the ones that don't require as much financial investment. So I thank you for sharing that. So Nicole, I've been excited to ask you this question. I feel like all we hear is performance, performance. You want everyone to perform and be productive, right? With that being said, how do you see ERGs really supporting that, high performing culture that most of our executives do aspire to, whether that's through employee development, leadership development, or other ways?
Yes, thank you. This is such an important question, and I think um, it's an interesting environment that we're in right now, and it's kind of like both sides of the same coin, right? So we're hearing from upper management and executives like you need to be focused on your core role, you need to be performing, you need to be driving impact. And so I think a lot of people who are, leading ERG work or doing kind of project work outside of their day job feel this pressure increasingly to spend more of their focus on like their core role, their core competencies. But the reality is, ERG work is actually a super powerful and underutilized driver of employee performance, leadership development, and a ton of skills that are needed to develop the next, pipeline of talent within the company. And so there really should be a positive support for that type of work. ERG work gives employees access to real leadership experience that they likely would never get in their current day-to-day roles, especially if they're earlier in their career or, coming from a really technical background. They now are in this spot where they're having to develop a strategy, create a structure, hire people and volunteers into the work, manage a really big budget sometimes, get executive presence and communication skills that they're developing in front of sponsors and senior leaders. They're working cross-functionally across multiple teams and functions oftentimes. They're learning to influence without authority. So, I could talk all day long with the business terms of all of the amazing things that ERG leaders are doing. And all of those that I named are core leadership skills. They're the same skills that we expect from high performing executives across their actual business areas. And what's unique about ERGs is what I said is, it creates a space for employees to practice and develop those skills much earlier than they otherwise might, and with a lot of autonomy at times. And so for many of us who, got into that work, it's really a first opportunity to build some of those skill sets, lead initiatives from end to end, get a lot of visibility with senior stakeholders. And I think it can be just completely transformative to your individual career when you have the right support. And so we need organizations to be more intentional about helping their employees translate that ERG experience into business impact. Be the bridge between HR or management teams of ERG leaders to make sure that those skills are getting highlighted and recognized fairly in performance review settings, promotion conversations, internal mobility conversations, all those conversations of like, the next level opportunities and who should be the right person to take them on. Companies need to be supporting that so that all of this work is seen as like talent development pipeline for those next spots. And, if leveraged well, ERGs can be a super strategic asset to the business. So I'd love to hear though from Jesse and Carlo as well, your thoughts and experience.
Yeah, no, I love you focusing on the business competencies and terminology because I think the translation piece is key. Like I think we have leads doing so much work and it's easy to get heads down, just checking things off the list and not communicating what was the impact, how did this help me grow, how will it help the business? So I think if there's a DEI team, if it's an HR team, a culture team, whoever is that like middle liaison, really working with the leads and the members to communicate that with their managers so that there are those growth opportunities. So I love that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one thing just to add there, and you hit right on it, Jesse, is we've been really intentional on who our executive sponsors will be. And so trying to get senior leaders from different stages or different parts of the org chart. So for instance, we have a sponsor who is in HR, who helps people with that performance piece and really making sure that you showcase the work that you're able to do in your ERG in your review. And so we actually had, this is the first time I ever had anything like this, and I absolutely loved it. But one of our co-chairs actually did an end of year report to show the impact that they were able to showcase through all the events and all the different things that they did. And then from there, we were able to craft that into a review. And that's one thing that we do here at Red Ventures. I write reviews for all of the co-chairs and send them to their managers to showcase this is the performance outcome that they were able to do, and this is how it translates to your business. And that's mid-year and annual, because we want to showcase that. Because, you know, a manager will always say, oh, well, how does this relate to what you're doing on your day-to-day? Well, here's a review to showcase how it does.
Amazing. I love that you do that. I love that you do that. And so for anyone that is leading efforts, please think about how you can share that, because it is really, really challenging for an ERG leader to dedicate time, especially during their workday, to running the ERG if their manager doesn't understand the value of it. And so as much as you all can share their efforts to their manager, that will just support them in being able to work harder. What we've also seen at Perfecta too with some of our clients is that their executive sponsors will reach out to the managers of the ERG leaders just to say like, hey, I just want to let you know Carl's doing a great job with his ERG leadership. It is really helping us accomplish X, Y, Z, or however they can share some of the wins as well. It's also a great thing. Some other things that I wrote down, especially seeing what you all were saying in the chat, and Jesse, Nicole, you kind of mentioned, you did touch on that. It's making sure your ERG leaders can communicate how their ERG leadership translates to overall leadership. These two things are not so separate. Strong ERG leaders, they also perform really well and can perform really well in their day jobs if they know how to talk about the two kind of together, right? At Perfecta, we started leading a training to really coach ERG leaders on how to do that, because sometimes they don't know, they're not sure how does this actually translate to my career development. And the other thing I want to mention is for some of you all that might be thinking about succession planning, this is another avenue where you can say your ERG leaders, they get extra leadership development support, right? Some companies do provide extra coaching, or that's through an outside executive coach or sending them to conferences and things, putting together whatever that value prop of ERG leadership at your company will certainly support your succession planning and give your current ERG leaders a better way to communicate the value. Of course, you can use them as case studies and get them to share their experience as well, too. All right, next question is about executive sponsors, or really just how to communicate value, which is kind of what I was just talking about. Carla, I'll turn this question to you. How can ERG leaders, exec sponsors, or any other people leader communicate the value of ERGs to senior leadership in a way that resonates? If there's any particular metrics you would prioritize, feel free to share that as well.
Yeah, I think the metrics piece, I just want to kind of give a disclaimer. It's going to be different for every company, right? And so just kind of keep that in mind of having that conversation. And so in terms of executive sponsors, one thing that we are trying different this year, and I'll be happy to report later once we figure out if it works or not. But instead of having one or two particular executive sponsors for each ERG, we're doing an executive council. Where we have, call it 7 to 8 senior leaders in the company, all from different parts of the company, who can basically lean their expertise and their passion not only to one ERG, but multiple. So if you have someone from HR that can help from a business performance standpoint, they can utilize their skill set throughout the entire employee resource group ecosystem. So we'll see how this goes. But I think the first thing we do is we talk with senior leadership to kind of figure out and frame exactly what 3 things that they care about most, right? And so here at Red Ventures, the things that we've noticed throughout the last couple of years is that senior leadership is interested in talent, performance, and retention, right? And the way that I kind of framed this, and I talked to Letitia about this before, is I framed it, say it like we are, in terms of we are as in terms of the ERG. And the A, the R, the E stands for attract, retain, and empower. So how can we attract talent? How can we retain it and keep it here? And we're talking about that leadership incubator. And then how do we empower them while they're here at Red Ventures? And so when it comes to the attract piece, right, one of the strongest signals of an ERG impact is whether members stay longer and they feel connected to the organization. And when employees feel a sense of belonging, they are significantly more likely to stay longer. I mean, that's just obvious, and the stats showed it from what Letitia was mentioning earlier. And so that's one of the most, call it, expensive problems organizations face. And it's unfortunately a burden that ERGs have to carry, but we want to make sure that we can showcase these metrics in terms of how long people are here. And you can look at the tenure, work with HR to kind of figure out the tenure of how long some of your ERG members have been at Red Ventures and things of that nature. The other piece is we always talked about the leadership incubator. And so that internal mobility that you all mentioned before, ERG leadership is often what I consider a training ground for future leaders, right? And so making sure they understand and we have the metrics to show like, hey, this was a co-chair who was once an analyst or a senior analyst, and now they are a director or a senior director here at Red Ventures. And of course, they did well at their day to day, but we can showcase how they gain skill sets throughout their time as a co-chair. And I think the biggest piece around the attract, retain, and power is that, like I mentioned, that attract and retain portion, which is the talent attraction and the employer brand. And it reminds me of a story with when I was a recruiter here at Red Ventures. And I remember trying to hire someone. This person was going to be great for the company. And I said, do you have any more questions for me? And he said, yeah, let me know about your ERGs. What do you have going on there? And this is a time that Red Ventures did not have ERGs. And it was so embarrassing to sit there and say, especially as a Black man, to say, I'm sorry, like we do not have any ERGs here. And we knew that a shift needed to happen. And I appreciate Red Ventures for hearing us and developing what we have now. And so I think the biggest thing is the ERG visibility can play a powerful role in recruitment and employer brand. And I think those are big things when it comes to senior leaders. And so just making sure that you understand what those metrics are. And when you're having that conversation, shifting to saying like, oh, here's what we did, and shifting that to say like, here's the impact that we had here at our ERG.
I love the "we are." I put that in the chat as well, and I think that's a really, really wonderful way. It's one is memorable, but it's also aligned. And what I also appreciated is the stomping grounds, the training ground, right? That this leadership is like an incubator, as you said. So two more questions, and then you all, we're going to open up questions to the audience. I did see some really good questions coming through in the chat, so please feel free to use see if the Q&A function is here, or you can drop your questions in the chat. We should have time for maybe two or three questions. So I want to kick this question to Jesse. I have a question for Nicole, and then we're going to open it up to you all. So feel free to go ahead and start dropping your questions in there, or just let us know what resonates, because we can talk about this all day long. So Jesse, my question is for you around meaningful executive sponsorship. This is a question that I get almost every single day. It's what do I tell my executive sponsors to do? How do I hold them accountable? How should they be supporting the ERGs? So I would love your thoughts on how we can best go about figuring that out for our organizations.
Yeah, and I love how Carlo kicked off the last answer where you shared there's not like a one size fits all approach. So I will say the same thing here for executive sponsorship. It could really look different depending on the industry, the organization, if it's in person, hybrid, or remote. So just wanted to start with that. But from my experience, I've seen kind of like three areas that have served the sponsor role and the members well. So one bucket is connection, the second is engagement, and then the third is support. So if we start with connection, when we think of executive sponsors, they have a direct line to parts of the organization that ERG leads and members may not have otherwise had access to for years, even. Usually the leads or the members are a lot more younger, not as tenured as these sponsors. So that's a direct line to a lot of senior leadership and opportunities there. But at the same time, we know that executives are busy. So it's not fair to assume just because you have a sponsor at the executive level that this connection will happen organically. And it also doesn't mean that the sponsor is a bad sponsor, so to say. They may just not have this on their many list of things to do. So I share that because this is where the voice of the leaders or the members really comes into play. And you all, if we have ERG leaders or members on the call today, like you do have influence and you do have say and you do have a space to create for that group as well. So I will say if the sponsors are not intentionally doing this, so whether they're not joining your meetings, events, ad hoc sessions with your community, it's okay to ask. And pro tip, I would say, depending on how your org is structured, usually the executive assistants are like the best way to work with a sponsor, right? They're the ones that meet with these sponsors one to one, and they kind of help them check things off of their list. So that's a pro tip there for the connection piece. Second bucket is engagement. So these sponsors, they bring a lot of visibility, they bring a lot of influence to the group. So when a sponsor shows up to an event, when they sign a communication, or when they speak openly about the ERG, especially when you're not in the room, if you're a leader or a member and they're speaking about you or the impact or the ERG in general, when you're not in a room, that's a huge component. And that's literally them sponsoring the group. I will also say, in terms of engagement, I'm not sure if you've heard of the term frozen middle, but there are a lot of middle level managers who are, we know, stretched thin. I saw a statistic earlier this week where, given all the changes in the workforce right now, middle level managers have even more direct reports because so many orgs are flattening their structure of their teams. So, given that context, we know this group has a bunch of things that they're prioritizing. A sponsor can remind these middle managers, hey, ERGs are not just a nice to have, right? They're a strategic business driver. So leaning in on them to engage the frozen middle is key. And then the third bucket here is support. So in terms of supporting, there's a few different ways, right? So I'll speak to a few. Advocating during budget planning for ERGs to receive budget. Some ERGs get budget, some do not. If you do not have a formal ERG budget, how can that sponsor work with other lines of the business to see if we can pull from different buckets and get creative? I've seen that work well. And then also influencing the ERG and advancing their goals, again, when you're not in the room. So, say the executive is at an industry event, which oftentimes they are. Are they connecting the dots between a person that they met or a panel that they attended? And could that panelist or that topic relate to your ERG? If so, let's again support the ERG and make those connections. So those are three buckets, high level, that I think are positive ways that sponsors can be leveraged. But really the takeaway here is ensuring that a sponsor role, it's not just symbolic, but it's active, it's aligned to the ERG's goals, and it's accountable.
100% agree with everything that you said. It's more than just a figure, right? And so what does it look like for your sponsors to invest in their time and their energy? And like you said, every ERG executive sponsor is going to look different. I would also add like maturity is a big thing as well. Like depending on how mature the ERG is, they may or may not need as much executive sponsorship, but then also paying attention to the time of year, right? Like we're in Women's History Month. So, executive sponsors for those women's ERGs will likely lean in more during that time. So it's really important to align. But, you all please share expectations with your executive sponsor because as Jesse said, sometimes they don't really know, right?
Hmm.
So you got to tell them, right? And that ERG leaders feel comfortable in asking for help, but you may have to support them in knowing what level of their ask is worthwhile. So thanks for that. Um, Please go ahead and start dropping questions in the chat. I do have a lot more questions I can ask, but want to hear from you all if you have any burning questions. Nicole, this question is for you. For ERG leaders, managers, anyone that is feeling discouraged, maybe is not having as much support, but is still feeling really called and empowered to do this work. They still believe in it. What advice would you give?
I think this is such an important question and a good one for us to kind of end our conversation on this topic. It's like real talk, this work is really, really hard to do. And especially in the current environment that we're all operating in, it can be really easy to just be discouraged, get burnt out, feel undervalued. And, when you're a member of your community who is likely the one experiencing, a lot of challenges just based on your identity group. And on top of that, trying to be the leading force to make change for your group, it's just a huge emotional burden. And then add on to that, as the leader for your community, you are carrying a lot of relational labor that can be like the invisible glue that's keeping your community together. And you're hearing feedback and experiences. Not just leading the events, you're in those hard conversations, and it can just be really, taxing. So I think it's so important to acknowledge that. And I think some things that can really help is one, don't lose sight of why you started the work. Like, stay really close to your passion, your motivators, like what gets you excited about the work. Check in with yourself around that and find ways to like remember that on those hard days. I think another thing is celebrate your small wins. Even, they may seem small. Maybe it's not like that big budget or what you were expecting from your sponsor. Or maybe that like big event that you wanted to do this year isn't going to happen. Like, celebrate the small wins. The work you are doing matters so much. Like, the spaces that you're creating, the conversations that you're opening up, it's literally affecting many people, their mental health. People who may be the only on their team and had, never had a space like this before. It's just so important. And then I think the last tip is remember to pour into your own cup. I think as ERG leaders and DEI practitioners, we are often servant leaders. It's a lot of the work is servant leadership in service of our community. But it's really important to pour into yourself as well and find events and spaces where you can just be a member and not the organizer and the leader, because you need to fill your cup as well and find your community and spaces that you're supported. So try to stay grounded in those tips, and then just like tune out the negativity. Like, you are incredible. You have been doing this work in hard times. And so continue to advocate, continue to push. Like, this work takes a really long time. That's what it is to be driving systemic change. We've seen the ebbs and flows of that. So yeah, just keep driving, keep pushing forward, stay resilient, stay determined, because this work is not going away in terms of its importance. It's more important than ever to be building these safe community spaces for employees. So those are my tips.
Thanks, Nicole. Wow, I feel like that was for me too, you know? We need to put you on a podcast. Give us a voice recording so I can listen to that every morning. That was beautiful. Thank you. All right. Any questions? I guess we got 3 minutes left, so we're gonna do what do you call it? A fire round real quick. Um, if a company could make one move in the next 60 days to strengthen its ERGs, what should it do? I want to hear from one or two panelists. Next 60 days. What should they do?
Quickly, yeah, I'll quickly just
Thanks,
add,
Jesse.
and I think Carlos spoke to it earlier, but make sure you have member feedback, because what I've seen oftentimes is leads creating programming without really knowing if that's what the members want. So if you don't have the feedback, collect the feedback.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think just to add on to that, just try to find ways to define ERG leadership roles as recognized leadership opportunities. And so that's with making performance reviews, development plans, whatever it looks like, creating executive mentorship. Just find ways to showcase how you are impacting, like the leaders are being impacted in terms of leadership.
Yes. Nicole?
Two things. One, if you're an ERG leader, I highly encourage you to just evaluate your current leadership structure and check in if that's the right structure for the next phase of growth that you're looking at. Like, do you have the right people on your team? Do you have enough volunteers on your team? Do you need to bring in some additional people? It's okay to make changes, and you want the right structure in place for your team. And then for companies, invest in this work. Like, please invest in talent development, skills development, and not just for the ERG leaders, but for the executive sponsors as well. I think going back to a lot of the points that Jesse made in that conversation. We can't expect executive sponsors to know how to do this, just the same as like we can't expect people who are raising their hand to be ERG leaders to know exactly how to do it because they've never done the job before. So executive sponsors may be an executive in their one area, but they've never necessarily sponsored this type of work. And so a really good way that companies can support that is investing in the development of executive sponsors and training them so that the ERG leaders don't have to carry that burden and constantly be the ones making those asks. So those are my 2 tips.
Thank you. Thank you all. And if you all don't know where to start, please reach out to us. More than happy to provide resources, point you to the right direction. We at Perfecta host ERG Leadership Summits. We're working on the ERG Leadership Academy. We train executive sponsors. So we will help you get your ERGs together. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn or via email. And for those of you that stay, check the chat to download a copy of our guide, How to Communicate the Value and ROI of ERGs. So that will be coming through in a minute, so you can download it, and we will also send that out via email. So thank you to our phenomenal panelists, Nicole, Jesse, Carlo, you all are amazing. Thank you everyone that stayed the entire time. Thanks for spending the hour with us, and we look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Thanks everyone.